Awesome. So yeah, hello everyone. This is the fourth edition of the ASEC webinar series with Dr. Chung today. So Dr. King Chung is the Vice President of Technology of Well Resources, a Canadian technology company that be founded in 2006 that focuses on green and clean technology development across multiple industries. Dr. Chung was born in Malaysia and immigrated to Canada in 1977 at the age of 18. He holds a bachelor's and master's degrees in chemical engineering from Queen's University and a PhD in chemical and petroleum engineering from the U of C. Dr. Chung is a registered professional engineer with the PEGA, a Fellow of Engineers Canada, a Honorary Fellow of Geoscientists Canada, and was recently inducted as a Fellow of the Canadian Academy of Engineering. With more than 300 papers published in reference journals, 120 company reports, and more than a dozen patents attributed to his name, Dr. Chung has received several achievement awards, including the 2002 Alberta Science and Technology Leadership Award for his contributions to the heavy oil industry. He has a broad perspective and background on oil sands operations and is a process troubleshooting expert for heavy oil and bitumen operations, including heavy oil processing. So on to you now. Would you like me to go to the next page?
Could you go to the next page, please?
And kind of introduce Well Resources to us a bit.
Well, first of all, thank you for the introduction and welcome all the students. I guess it's kind of overdue for me to actually kind of share some experience with some of you are going to be graduating soon, I guess, right? And I thought this is the very timing for to actually looking at the real perspective. So before I go into the detail, I just like to kind of briefly just to show you like what resources is get involved with. We are basically a Alberta company, and we focus on green and clean technology development, and we provide the process licensing. And our philosophy is basically talk about how can we do better is to basically have the zero, so-called like the no waste processing. In other words, we don't see like, like when you do the processing, we're going to create any byproduct. We're going to make use of all of them. And then the next thing, like, it come to the bigger picture is like, we had to basically try to achieve the effective resource utilization. Like in the case of oil sand, we make sure that we use up every bit of the so-called like the oil that we produce from the oil sand, etc. And then we also have a network of international partnership with very advanced R&D organization, and we involved with a lot of leading edge kind of R&D initiative. And we had office in Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Qingdao in China. And we also have another affiliate in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur. So on this slide, the picture just show you some of the technology that we license and we is actually up running now. And on top of the picture, you see the China University of Petroleum, and the next one is the Guangzhou Food and Drugs what they call college. And then the last one on the right-hand corner is the Academy of Science building at the Qingdao. So with that kind of so-called involvement, so I just like to kind of like give you the highlight first, and then we can go to the detail. So what we are doing at the beginning, obviously, like as the introduction, part of it, they talk about like I spend a lot of time doing energy. And lately, in the last 5 years or so, we get into something what we call like the food, water, energy nexus. And the reason we get into this, obviously, there's some history behind it, because when you do the energy, you always get into some of these kind of ways. Then the question is like, how can you actually make good use of this material? So with that, I think it's just one thing leading to another, and not to be, we kind of have these three. And if you go to the website, you can see like actually these three so-called area is actually fall under the UN so-called like sustainable development topic. And this is what we call the food, water, energy nexus. So I just going to give you the very highlight kind of introduction, and then I try to get into some of the discussion that we're going to have, and then you're going to see like how this thing come about. And on the first thing, I think when I was asked to kind of talk about my experience is like, how do you actually go from academy to the business world? So when we talk about academy and business, and I guess like maybe the better way to talk about business is like, when I first graduate from university and I go to work in the industry, I think that's what they meant for the beginning. So I just like to give you some background of where I was from, and how how I spent my time in UC, and how I get my first job in Alberta. So obviously, like when I start out at Queen, I was doing chemical engineering, and like many of the immigrant, like we don't have any so-called like root in Canada. So the first thing, like when I got a scholarship and to do the graduate study, and I was looking around, and I asked my professor, it's like what are the exciting topic out there, and he was asking me about what kind of interest do I have, and blah blah blah. So I say, well, I really like a lot of things, but it kind of really can't decide what should I do. But so I thought about it. He said, well, why don't you think about it and let me know what is the criteria that. So I thought about it. I say, what sort of thing that a chemical engineer they'll do actually make the most money? So it sounds pretty obvious, right? So he thought about it. He said, well, I think that, it's not very high tech, it's kind of very old in the sense that, that was back in the 80s now. And this is how I get into doing petroleum, because when you look at it, the reservoir engineering, I wonder whether any of you are doing reservoir engineering. They do make a lot of money because, and start to think about it's not because you make a lot of money because of the work that you're doing, but it's actually, more than that, you had to go into the field and it's very isolated and that sort of thing. So actually, you get paid for, some of these kind of extra thing that you put into it. And this is how I end up doing, like go to U of C, because in Ontario, nobody know about oil, right? So this is how I end up in Calgary. And I'm so glad at that time that I have, one of the supervisor that anyone that can dream of. And his name is, the late Dr. Butler. And for some of you probably heard about this, is like he's the inventor of the SACD, the horizontal well, and inject the steam. This is how we use it to produce our bitumen in Alberta. And I was so fortunate to be the first so-called like a PhD graduate student under him. And this is how I spent on about 5 years doing all those things. So when you talk about like going from academy to business, I think it has something to do. Sometimes it's like the economy, right? So when you are actually looking at what we are going through today, it sounds like, wow, this is very challenging. Like we have this low oil price, but back in 1986, the price of oil is only $8. That is equivalent to what we like have like $30 of oil price today, and it's very depressing. And this is how I end up, going from, what they call like a reservoir engineering type of work and become refining. Right? So now, you get into, so I work for Syncrude for 20 years. So when you talk about like, okay, so what sort of thing that you actually, transform from being a academia kind of work and become the business work. And this is why I think you start to see a lot of different thing now. And another thing I like, you being, in the university, you should actually start talking to your, fellow like so-called like a student in the different discipline of engineering, because you may need those kind of thing later on. And what I try to put that kind of thing in perspective, it is like, for instance, like in the university, this is the idea. It's so ideal about, what we talk about, like the different engineering that we know of. But when you go to work in the uh, real world, for instance, at the university, we talk about like when you write the exam, it's like, you get the right answer, you're done, right? But in the real world, you know what? It's all about money. So you should think about like, how you actually, like for instance, when you talk about like in the university setting as compared to what you are in the what they call like the business or in the real world look like. So this is the kind of thing that I think for some of the you might be aware about some of those things, like and later on I will try to kind of give you some example about what this is all about. Okay. So you can like think about what I went through is like I tried to do the upstream oil production, and then I landed out doing a job as a refining. So sometime back then when I thought about this, I say if I knew that I'm going to be doing refining, I should have taken some of those courses or whatever related to reaction and that sort of thing.
Right.
But in real world, thing never work out that way. So, but that's okay. You still have to kind of like learn it very quickly. I think with all the kind of engineering type of training that we have, I think we should be quite flexible. Don't worry about thing that you don't know, because you will learn along the way. Okay. So, Ruth, can you move on to the next slide?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next topic that we are going to talk about is like is that like we look at some of the energy sector, sort of what exactly they are doing. Okay. So this is the part like I thought about, like you should understand this, because whatever the business does is all about making money. It's all about making money, right? So whatever you do, so you have to make yourself like like be realistic about what the real world is like. Okay. So for instance, like I shouldn't say think bad about some of the things that we spend all the time in university is this, because most of the learning I think at the university you should be aware of is like we seem to try to understand a lot of things. Okay. But we cannot predict anything. What I meant is like, for instance, like in the classroom kind of setting is like we tend to hear the professor tell us about saying, I can explain to you how this thing work. Okay. But that's not good enough in the business world. You need to able to predict something, right? To explain something is like satisfy your kind of like how to say, like like you understand all how things work. But the key is to able to predict what the performance of a process or some kind of thing that you're trying to do. So that's a key that you should understand. So the reason I say that is like this is where you're going to start to kind of like sometimes some people, I think that they are so, how to say this, like good in the academy, and they when they go into the business world, and then they basically have a culture shock and they still cannot get around it. And so these are the things that I think you should be aware about, like what is going on. So the next thing I think the question that asked me to brought forward is like, how is my kind of what they call
So how kind of has your overseas kind of global
yes,
perspective
yeah,
affected
yeah.
what you think is
So
the future of the energy industry?
yes. So for some of you, kind of wonder, like, how different it is if I were the so-called a homegrown Canadian as compared to if, happen to be, I'm the immigrant, right? Yeah, I'm an immigrant coming to Canada. So or at least from the beginning, I start to expose to the different type of, like different world, we talk about East and West, that kind of thing. So, since I was in the energy sector, yeah, back then, and to be honest, when I look at what's happening back in the 80s, oil industry is considered as a sunset industry. Okay, it's a, like, for instance, do you know that the last refinery built in the North America, including Canada, it was 1974.
Quite a while
1974.
ago, hey?
Okay, quite a long time ago. And I think back in the late in the early 80s, Shell actually built a so-called like a refinery, but that refinery is not quite the refinery, the complete refinery. It's more like the add-on, right? So like if you go back to look at the history book, the last refinery we built in North America was 1974. So you can imagine, back in the 80s when we have recession, all the major oil company basically lay off the R&D because they just don't see that, the benefit of, invest in the R&D when they are not going to build anything. So this is why I think people refer to the oil industry as a sunset industry. So what happened was, I happened to be at that time, like, because as you, look back the history now, China start to come out, and I happened to, receive a lot of the student, the postdoc from China. And when people ask me, he say, why this Chinese guy want to do the oil? And I thought about it. I say, maybe that's what the nature is like, when we at sunset, but in China or in Asia, it's a sunrise. So you see, at least we still need to do something. So this is where I think, like, you start to see some turning point there, right? And then another thing, I think when we look at even today, the discussion, we talk about the pipeline, all those things, you realize that in Alberta or in Canada, we are very much like a resource supplier. We have a lot of resource, and we are the one that actually had to export our resource. In this case, will be oil and gas, right? But if you look at all the consumer that out there, like in Asia, like like Asia Pacific, these are the high growth area. These are the places that they don't. It's not that they don't have; they just don't have enough of it. So you see, this is why I think when you look at the energy sector, it's very funny. It's not like you have or you don't have. It's just like people like us, like in Canada, we have a lot of this, but we don't have a lot of people to use them. And those guys that in the Far East, they have some, but then they have a lot of people that and they need more. So this is the thing that you start to see, the difference in terms of, like, the kind of dynamic in terms of, one is the demand, one is a supply. And then the next thing, like, this is why I think most of the time when people talk about our economy, is always like we had to rely on somebody buying our stuff. We just don't have enough people to actually consume all what we make, all what we produce in Canada. And then the next one I thought is very important to share with you. I don't want to go to very, very specific in terms of, like, like the very detailed thing, but I just want to give you the bigger picture of what the thing look like. And then today, I think you also come across, like, some of the big headline like greenhouse gas, net zero emission. So, I don't, I don't want to take side because there are a lot of discussion on in the media now. It's like saying who is right, who is wrong. And I think that there's no such thing as right or wrong, but it's just a matter of saying, you had to understand, how things are in perspective, right? For instance, like when we talk about the greenhouse gas, I remember back in the 80s, the early 80s, when I drove to this so-called like Columbia ice field. Yeah, I think most of you been to Columbia ice field before, right? From like if you drive from Calgary to Jasper,
Yeah,
You know
Jasper.
what? When you get to the Columbia ice field, the glaciers is just next to the highway. You can basically the highway cut across the ice field. You can touch it, right? But today, if you go to the Columbia ice field, you basically had to drive a few kilometers before you can actually touch the glaciers now. So just to give you whether you think it's real or not, but these are the things that we know we have it in Alberta, right? And then the next one, I think you see people talk about the sea level is rising, right? And then the next one, I think if you talk to the Chinese, and you realize that in China half of the so-called I think the big chunk of this Himalaya, the Mount Everest are on the Chinese side, and because these few years they have such a high quick melting of these glaciers, and there are a lot of these flash flood going on, and it wash away a lot of villages. So this is the kind of thing that you start to see people get excited about doing something, because doing nothing is definitely is a no-no. Maybe do something, you can do some, you can turn things around a little bit better. And then just about a month ago you start to hear about this net zero emission initiative. So when you look at it, I think for the new young graduate that going to the job, to the world now, I think this is the perfect opportunity for you to actually go to do something, because most of the time, from my experience, is that the industry are not in the process to do anything if they just can make them, make a living, right? And if you ask them to do something new, they are not interested, because we should understand some of those behind the people running the company. So these are the things that I want you to kind of cautious you about, what you expect in the real world. So and even today we are facing with all these so-called like the pandemic and the low oil price and that sort of thing. But I don't think that you should be discouraging, because if I were still working like 10 years ago, I would be very concerned, right? But if I were you basically start with a blank piece of paper. I think you should go out there to do whatever you think is right. And it so happened to be when we are in such a situation, people are more willing to try something different. So this is sometimes may not be the bad thing, that to actually able to try something different. And this is why I think even today, when I look back, like being an immigrant, as compared to many of you are actually like kind of like born in Canada, maybe it's good that you take a year off and you go to travel around to see the rest of the world, because whatever happening in Canada is definitely not the real world. Okay, it's only a small part of the world, right? For instance, our Canadian economy, when you look at the whole world perspective, it's only 1% of the whole world. Okay, and obviously the big one are US and China. These are the two big ones. So you should start to expose yourself to see what is out there. Okay, and you should start to see, for instance, in China today now, you think about, it's not just because you see the media like to talk about like everybody, have very negative view on the oil. It's not true, because we still need oil for quite a few years before we can actually turn things around, right?
Mm,
So this is very, very important. And for instance, in China today now, all the car company, they basically had to sell 20% EV, meaning electric vehicle.
yeah.
Yeah. So you see, so in our, when you look at it, you open up a lot of opportunity for a lot of people doing different things now. In the last 10 years, we have been just talking about burn, just burn the hydrocarbon, right? But now it's different ball game now. So this is why I think it's good, like you don't have any so-called liability or any baggage behind you yet. You start from scratch, and you can do whatever the people willing to hear what you had to offer. So these are the things that I thought is very, very good. I so look around. Okay, so this is why I think maybe you are in the process of busy writing exam, but sometime when you have some time, you should go out and look at the internet and see what other people in the world are doing right now. Okay, definitely, I think it's an exciting world out there.
Everything's kind of going international, really.
Yeah, I think like we shouldn't. I think very good that we being in a province that we actually very upfront in terms of what we're doing. Very real. This is why when I talk about this food, energy, and water, these are the three essential commodity that we have to have, because without food you die, without water you won't have a very good health. Okay, and without the energy, definitely you are very primitive. So these are the things that I think. But and a good thing is like we already like basically very upfront in terms of like doing what the society need. So these are the things that you definitely had to kind of like look beyond energy now this day. Okay. So the next one, I think the is also the big topic. Like we talk about like going from a researcher to the business owner. So
Mm,
Ruth, you like to pop to the next slide?
yeah, I think it's on my end, it's already kind of popped
Oh,
through.
okay, okay. So what I like to kind of like tell you a few things, because obviously one of the things good about being in the energy sector is like I don't know, well, people tell you some of this experience. No, you will have a lot of opportunity to travel abroad. If you like traveling, this is the perfect course of career that you can have. Okay. And for instance, like being a Canadian, even when I was a student, a lot of companies recruit a lot of our Canadian students, and they place them overseas, because we have a very good system that we can actually get the job done. So that was before, but I think even more so than before now. You don't even have to basically kind of like, oh, I work for the big company, but even you yourself, if you start something small or whatever, you can do it. So to start out with this topic now, if you were to ask me saying, if I were to be interested to do something like what you are doing, what should I do? So the very first thing I would like to advise you is this, okay? I mean, like maybe it's kind of a little bit late, but it's still not too late yet. You should learn a little bit more about business, like for instance, business meaning like, maybe like if you have a sister or you're some friend in the first year or second year, you should start to tell them like to take some elective in the business, okay? Because you need a lot of those, okay? First of all, if you come up with some crazy idea or some good idea or whatever, it doesn't matter. The first thing is when you go to talk to the banker, okay, they will ask you something like, show me your business plan. And for instance, when I first heard about this, I was like, black out. I never know how to do all this kind of thing, right? When we do troubleshooting, we solve some problem. It's very scientific kind of stuff. But when you start to talk about business plan, you have to start to see like what is actually the ingredient that you need to actually prepare that piece of document. So this is definitely the kind of thing that I would advise you, like you should spend some time to learn something that I don't know why the engineering school don't tell the student to do something, to take other courses, but I don't know, maybe we just don't have enough time to do everything. Okay. But keep in mind, okay, you need that kind of stuff. Then the next thing is, I think you should understand this. When you talk about like, the kind of thing that you might be doing is like, um, obviously like you spend 4 years and you learn some of the basic stuff, and you go and work for someone or you do something. That's great. But you should always think that way, like maybe one day you can kind of like run out of all these things that for instance, like you get burned out. So at the same time you should start like keep renew yourself, like go to maybe take some courses or whatever to just refresh some of those. And another one I was mentioning earlier is like maybe you might want to take some vacation and then go abroad and see what other people is doing. Okay. And so those are the ones. And then this is the kind of thing, the important thing I think, like, in life, okay, is to have a dream. You had to have a dream. Okay. I'm sure that you had to work for someone to get the money to pay for your food and your house and all those things. But I think the end of the day is after you have all these things, then you ask yourself, what next? I think this is where you should have a dream. And with the dream, this is where I think, this is why I when people ask me, how I end up doing this. I worked for Syncrude for 20 years. And I think another way people always talk about this is like say, oh, you work like a donkey. It is a donkey because we only do something like, the company want to make a few dollars, but it may not be the same thing like you really like to do. So this is the kind of thing like, we had to have a dream, right? So in my case, I just don't think that, we should keep, like doing, like fixing the old car kind of thing, like for instance, I mentioned to you earlier about the oil industry was almost like, I would say 80 years old. And how can you actually have this reactor and all these things, 80 years old with a little bit of like, maybe, like touch up kind of thing and keep running for 80 years? Don't you think you have better thing to do? And this is where my dream, I like to kind of say, maybe we should do something different, right? For instance, 10 years ago, when you are in in junior high or something, right? You look at the cell phone that we have, it's all those like you can make a few call and then, you can send a text. That was pretty cool, right? But today, you know what? We our cell phone can actually replace our laptop now, right? So this is to show you, like, these are the things that, we talk about human civilization and the progress in the science and can help our lives better. And that's what it is. So you have a dream. But the next thing is you have to have a lot of patience, okay? I tell you why later. You have to have a lot of patience. And then obviously you need to have some financial kind of backing, otherwise, you can't just like, live without food or anything. So these are the three basic things. Is like you have to have the dream, you have to be patient, and you need to know a lot of people that maybe can support you, like to get you through some of the so-called like the tough time. Okay. And then I think when you go to look for, so in other words, you may be the smartest guy in the world, but you know what? It's useless because you need more than you yourself. You need a team of people. You see, today, we simply cannot do anything by ourselves now. We had to be, do everything in like a team, okay? So I think for a person, I think very important is like you had to make sure that you have good integrity. Like this is the basic thing that a person should have, right? And then the next one is like I think you should have the good perspective of what the world look like. In other words, you had to do the what they call the right thing, right? It's no point to do something like it maybe look so cool, but you know what? It's irrelevant, right? And then the next one is like you had to be, very capable. How do you say capable? Meaning, you had to work extra hard for this kind of thing. There's no such thing like you get it by luck. I haven't tried. At least I didn't see that part yet. Okay, and again, please, like be smart on the textbook is one thing, but you basically have to mix around and get to know as many people as you can, because you never know who you might need to get help one day. Okay, so these are the things that I think the soft part of it is like you have to have all these things. And then I want to kind of roll to the next thing that I want to tell you about this, because very soon when you actually go out and work and get into the real world now, you will start to realize that there are so many people had different agenda. Okay, what do you mean by this? For instance, if you talk about a big company CEO, guess what? They only had 3-year contract. They are on contract. Like all the big corporation, the CEO, the VP, they are all on contract. It's only the director level down, they are on payroll. So when you are basically talking to those guys, guess what? If you basically have some kind of project that, is going to start to turn things around. In Canada, I think it would take more than 3 years to actually build something. Okay. So if you basically kind of like try to sell this thing to a CEO, guess what? This guy, it's not like they don't interested because it doesn't meet their what they call their deadline, because if they are not doing well, 3 years, they're gone. Okay. So this is the CEO. So the next thing is you think about the government. We always talk about, the government initiative in this. Well, you have to be careful about it, because government in our society, they only good for 4 years. Okay, every 4 years we vote in or vote them out. And another thing about government is they only care about glory. When they want to do something, they like to say, you know what, we have done this and done this. Never mind about whether you make money or not, but it's glory. This is what I call the glory. Government do things is to glorify themselves. Okay, make everybody think that they are, have achieved something. And maybe during election, we had a mandate, and this is what they are doing. So you should understand all these things. And then the next one, I think that we had to be realistic. Sometimes you may not agree with some of those things, but for Christ's sake, you have to stick with the system. Okay. For instance, today, if you were to write a proposal, please, if you don't put the word green in there, like as far as when you talk about the technical word now, if you don't put the word green in there, nobody is going to look at your proposal. Okay. So it's like, when I look at Alberta, and then I also look at Abu Dhabi, some of those big, rich country in the certain part of the world, they also, like Canada, they produce a lot of hydrocarbon. But guess what? Nobody in Abu Dhabi or in the so-called like the Gulf area, they will even look at our project on oil, because they look at themselves, it's like these are some kind of resource that is going to run out one day, and because of all these so-called environmental constraint that we are facing us now, they only support those projects that at least you can put the word green in there. So this is what I would like to kind of share with you about some realistic view about, like, what we should do thing. Sometimes, some people may have very so-called like a preset mind about what is right or wrong, but in real world, it's not like that. So these are some of the things that you should be aware of, right? And I think, having said that, this is why I think you get on to the next one. I think I want to talk about is like what I want to have some kind of like takeaway message for you with this. I think the end of the day, what I like, for all the things that I just said, I want you to basically have something that you're prepared what is coming, right? So for instance, like, you nowadays, you saw some of the news about saying even the Husky and Sonovo merge, there are 25% of the employees could get laid off, and all the company are going through second or third round of layoff. And I'm hope that, you don't have to go through that sort of thing. You actually, at least you are on the driver's seat and you can decide for yourself. Okay. So these are the kind of tools that I want you used to have. And Ru, can you go to the next slide?
Mhm.
The one that's showing the, yeah, this one. Okay. So what I want to talk about this is this. At the end of the day, I think we all have, we live in this so-called free world, and this is what the free world look like. We basically have ourselves like people, and then we had a corporation, and we had a government. It's always that way. And this is where I think these three are linked together, and we better make sure that, depending on where you are, and you should do, you should always remind yourself that's what you want to do, right? For people, what do? You provide a service to the company basically give you the wages. So this is like a give and take, right? And if you look at people and the government, it's like, we elect the government, but the government had to make sure that, he look after the well-being of the people. And then you look at the government and the corporation now, you see, government actually get a tax from the corporation, but because of the way they need to take care of the people, they basically have the regulation or some kind of law or whatever to make sure that the company comply. So this is, I think, like, it may sound ideal, but I still think that, we should strive for this thing, because I think what I see in Alberta this day, I think people is the how to say it, is the worst off, right? Because our government and the corporation, I think sometimes they basically have to make sure they do what they are supposed to do. I'm not in the position to criticize the company or the government, but I think sometimes that's what we are not doing so well, and not to be we get into, like, the situation we are in today. So this is what I my so-called, like, the last slide that I like to share with you about. The end of the day, that's what it is. Whatever we do, even we come up with being an entrepreneur, but you have to make sure that you understand whether you are actually in the position of a people, or you become the owner of the company. So these are the things that we should do. With that, I like to conclude my talk, and if you have any question, I will try to answer as much as I can.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Dr. Chung. Yeah, we're kind of opening the floor up to questions now. Um, the first one to come in from Nima is, how do you see the landscape of the energy industry changing in Alberta in the next decade?
Yeah, it's very, very good one, because I think this question should have been asked 10 years ago, honestly, because 10 years ago, we are in a very good position to do a lot of things. Meaning what? If you want to do something different, is when you have money. If when you don't have money, to be honest with you, there are very limited things that you can do. And I think what Alberta, you saw a lot of media kind of thing, is like saying, oh, we should diversify our economy. I had to be very cautious about use the word diversify, because the reason is this: we may end up going into a territory that we had no idea what it is. Okay, and this is where I think it's not is like we haven't tried. Back in the 80s, the taxpayer already done a lot of this initiative, and we blow a few 800 million, I think, a few of the paper mill, and some of the metal industry that we put the money in there as taxpayer. And what I think what we should do is we should basically build on our energy, and basically kind of like start to look at some of those cross border, like cross link kind of so-called industry. For instance, we may be in the case of the energy, and as I mentioned earlier about why we end up doing the food and the water, because we realize that by taking out some of the stuff from our oil, meaning some of the byproduct of our oil, we can actually make a better another product to do water treatment, for instance. Okay, and when you start to do water treatment, guess what? Why you need to have such a good clean water? It's not just like to sustain our living. We also need water to grow food. So now you see how I was basically put out the slide showing that we start with the energy, but now we do the food, water, energy nexus now. So I think at least when I look at it, it's like we're playing safe. Like, for instance, like we still have our energy, right? And then we start to diversify and do something else. But we are not just doing diversification for the sake of diversify. That is very dangerous. We the history will tell us that we should be very cautious. Yeah.
Awesome. And then any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I was just wondering, how big of a blow do you think with the recent blocking of the Keystone XL? Do you see that having a very highly negative effect on the industry in the next 5-10 years, or do you think it's pretty surmountable for Alberta?
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, I try not to become a politician, or I try not to be kind of like become foreseen as like I have some agenda. I don't, because what I'm going to tell you the next 2 minutes is these are all the facts, and all these are all the data. So what I meant by this is this. For instance, when you look at the amount of the pipeline we have, the question is, do we need, well, obviously, because with the pandemic, the demand of the oil also decreased, okay? So we ask ourselves now, do we really need all the pipeline? The answer is maybe. So I think if you ask me, do we need the pipeline? I think, in the maybe 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, we definitely need some kind of pipeline. Okay, if we keep expanding our production, you see, this is what something that you had to keep in mind. Okay, because obviously, like, if you're interested, you can go to our company website. You can see one of the technology that we have, and the technology that we have, it basically do two things. One is like you get rid of the upgrader. You don't need upgrader. Okay. The next thing is, if you want to take the oil out, you can actually do what we are proposing, and you can freeze up at least 30% of the capacity of the existing pipeline. So the short answer to your question is, I don't think that, it's a burning thing. Okay, I don't think it's a burning issue saying that, if we don't have it, we will die. No, we won't. But the question is like, what's next? Well, that's something that we need to think about it, because with all these so-called like net zero, with all these so-called like, people start to shift from hydrocarbon to something else, maybe we had to rebalance or the so-called like the production. Okay. So this is why I think, answer to your question, some of the reality check is this. Do you know why companies are start laying off a lot of people? It's not because they're going to shut down. They won't shut down for a while, okay? But the reason they don't need that many people is because they don't see the expansion. Because when you start to have expansion, you need to have a lot of people, right? Because you don't know how much work that you need. So you better off to hire a little bit more and get ready for the expansion. But if you look at what's going on in Calgary, you know very well, it's not going to be a big expansion coming out soon. Yeah. So, please go to our website and, and look at some of the things that we do. You see, like we don't do a lot of things that, people, like, or the government, we do something else. And I think the end of the day, when you look at it, it's like, why people interested in, for instance, the thing we're doing, because I think it makes sense, right? So, yeah, just to give you, the perspective, don't feel kind of like, oh man, without the pipeline, we are going to be finished. No, we are not going to finish. No, not true. Yeah.
Another question coming from Sabi. Sorry if I pronounced it wrong. Do you believe Alberta is preparing to transition towards the renewable energy industry? And does Alberta have the capacity? And what would the difficulties in transitioning be?
Well, to answer your first question is this. I think we don't have a choice, because you think about it, like, we are basically, like I said before, we are the provider. We supply people with all the raw material. And we don't have any control in terms of how, for instance, look at with the new president installed yesterday, it's very clear, because even 4 years ago, they already wrote, that's what their mandate on the wall already. And, we may have like the 4 year or so-called like the honeymoon kind of thing, right? But now if back to this Democrat, why we think that it is surprising at all? No, it's not surprising, right? There's political will there, right? And besides, it seems to be kind of agree with the rest of the world, because we have to rebalance our energy mix, right? So I think, like with the kind of, the capability we have and the expertise that we kind of inherit over the, like, the 50 years, we are actually in a better position to do something different, because we are already there before, right? It's obvious sometimes, like, you when you start to talk about do something different, and it creates some kind of crisis, in the head of some people. But I don't think that we should be afraid of this. Never. I was there, 40 years ago when oil price was $8. Guess what? I'm doing okay. everybody doing okay in Alberta. Obviously, it has some adjustment that we have to go through. Yeah, but no, never give up. Yeah.
Awesome. Any more questions in the chat or through voice? Feel free to just jump in at any time.
I should say one more thing. It is I haven't been back to UOC for the last 10 years now because I have been travel quite a bit, right? And I had to basically, like even though if I go back to UOC now, I don't even able to recognize the professor now. But nevertheless, I like to basically kind of like thanks all the professor or all, not just the professor, even the people work in the machine shop, like at that time, provide all these kind of like, education and the help that, I need to actually get through my graduate study. So that's the part that, I'm very thankful for, the university like give me a chance. And I also want to share one thing with you. Being in the university is the best in our life, okay? Because you think about it, you make a mistake, you may say, okay, I get 10 point less in the exam. That's it. You make a mistake in the company, somebody is going to can you. Somebody always had to find an excuse to so be aware about this kind of thing, from going from the academy to the real world, because it's not like, oh yeah, I make a mistake, I'm sorry. No, yeah, nobody will take sorry for the answer. Okay, so enjoy another few more months for you that in the fourth year. In the real world, it's not like that. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll leave the chat and everything open for questions. In the meantime, please, thank you so much, Dr. Chung, for joining us today, and it was really informative. And yeah, a little bit of promotion here, but we do have our ASEC conference coming up. That'll be on February 18th and 19th, and it'll include both Dr. Chung again, as well as WELL resources. And we have several other big events coming up as well. So, if you want to learn more about how to get a job, we do have a networking fair as well as a banquet that includes several different networking opportunities, as well as the speed career development segment that will allow you to kind of learn a bit more soft skills as well. So yeah, please check us out. I'll leave the link below, and we'll leave the chat and the screen open for additional questions up until 5 o'clock.
Yeah, and please feel free to go to visit our website. We definitely as a company, we don't do anything that's on the ground. We think that there are a lot of other. For instance, there are a lot of technology already on the ground. I think the company who own the process, they should fix it. And I think for us, that not actually own a refinery or some kind of equipment, we should try something different. And if you go look at our website, you will see some of those, like new idea, the new process. It's not just an idea. We actually commercialize those process already, but it's just not in Canada yet. Yeah.
Sabi asked from the chat, are you a judge, Dr. Khan?
No, I'm not a judge. I'm just like you, like just a commoner, harmfully, just like, happen to be, they give me all this kind of like title kind of thing. I think perhaps I sweat a lot. But I'm just like you, any of you, it so happen to be like, if I wish that I'm just like, exactly like you guys, like 40 years younger. No, I'm just a commoner, just like, like anybody, any other taxpayer, except like, we actually have a company and we do all these so-called like different thing, right? I wish that one day, like when pandemic thing go away, and then I should able to come down to the university again. I used to go to university, quite often anyway. But just the last 10 years, I travel a lot, so I never have a chance.
Right.
I always enjoy to be a student anyway.
Quick question on my end, actually.
Sure.
I was wondering, what do you think are like some of the biggest challenges in, like, say, patenting your own research, essentially? So how do you know that it's something that is not
Yes.
only worth patenting, but something that can be made into a product.
Okay. First of all, I think I did mention about something about, you should able to write a business plan. You should able to learn, or at least know what exactly in the business plan. And because you need to basically have some financial backer or something to fund something. And either you have a lot of money, good, right? But even you are using your own money, you still have to be kind of like, accountable to yourself. Like say, is it a good thing to do, right? So for instance, when you talk to the banker, guess what? The banker don't even care about the so-called like the technical component of it. They trust you, right? You know what they care about is the risk of their money, right? If they lend you the money, they just want to know when they're going to get the money back. Okay, so this is why I said sometimes it's good to actually talk about idea, but we had to be realistic. Okay, we had to be realistic, right? So this is, I think, your question is like, how do you know? How do you know? And I think when you actually have some crazy idea, is a must. Otherwise, there's nothing new out there. It's because someone had some crazy idea. That's why we have a lot of new things in our life, right? But you should be very open-minded. In other words, don't just think that your idea is the only idea out there. Okay, you should think about, you should be open-minded, meaning non-biased. I know it's difficult, right? Because every human being have their bias, right? The moment you open our mouth, even now I'm talking, I have my bias, right? But you should be try as much as like no bias to look objectively on the thing that you are think, let's say your idea, your invention. Okay. And this is why the business plan come in. And you start to able to come up with this thing and write basically do some pro and con, some kind of financial analysis, and lead to yourself first, right? And then you know what it is. Yeah. And one of the, I mentioned to you about my great supervisor that I had before. I learned a lot from this old gentleman back then. Okay, he asked, at that time there was a forum talk about, what exactly engineer do, right? What is engineering? Well, it turned out to be something not very difficult. First of all, engineer is troubleshooter. Engineer have to solve problem. Okay. If there's no problem, you don't need engineer. This is why I was saying something like with all the greenhouse gas emission, the net zero initiative, I'm so glad. Why? Now we have problem. Now we have job to do, okay? However, there's sometimes the problem is beyond fixing, okay? The problem is beyond fixing. So what do? We have to live with it sometime. Or we had to come up with some alternative. That's what engineer is all about. Okay. And obviously, when you come up with alternative, you had to do better than what you have existing one, right? So that's what it is. So that's what engineer is all about. Like for instance, whatever you talk about, we do as an engineer is always some science. Okay, I mean, when you do things, it had to be scientifically sound, right? But it's not done yet. We had to make money. Okay, I mean, be realistic about this, right? If you go to the chemistry building, okay, you talk to those guys. They don't care about making money. They just want to say, did this thing work? Does it sound cool, right? But that's not engineer. Engineer is always had the big dollar sign there. Whatever you do, you have something to do with the dollar sign because it's commercial, right? Yeah. So this is something like you don't hear from the professor, but that's what the real life is, right? Yeah. But this is why my ex-supervisor, he used to work, he's a general manager of SO for a long time. Yeah. So he taught me well, and I learned very well from him. Yeah.
Right. Any more questions in the chat? In that case, I think we can conclude it here then. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Chung.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you guys, everyone, for joining us. And please be sure to check out Dr. Chung and Well Resources, as well as the ASIC conference happening February 18th and 19th. So yeah, thank you so much then.
Good luck to everyone, okay? And take good care.